So that was series. Let's look at a different way to generate a list of numbers. I'll go ahead and delete all this. And I'll go back to Sets tab and go to Sequence. So series is one way to create a list of numbers. Range is a different way. Okay, and the difference is it takes a different set of inputs. So the difference between using series versus range usually depends on the situation that you're using and what ingredients you have to start with. So with range, it's a little different. Instead of with start point, then how many times to count past the start point. This one you set a minimum and maximum. So let's say 0 to 1 in this case. And then a number of steps in between that minimum and maximum. And at each of those steps, then we record a number. Okay, so 10 steps between the minimum and maximum. And that yields 11 values. And this is fairly predictable, right? So if we divide between 0 and 1 10 times, right? We end up with 11 values, starting at 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, all the way to 1, right? So let's take a look at what this spits out as we start to change some of these things. And just watch closely. You don't necessarily have to follow along on your computer. So I'm just going to use another widget to define that minimum maximum, which is called a domain. Okay, and that'll allow me to change the domain, the minimum with a slider and the maximum with a slider. So I'll go ahead and change the max here to something higher, like 10. That way we can adjust this, and I'll leave this slider alone. I'll just set it to 0. I'll plug this in for the minimum, plug this in for the maximum. I'll go ahead and adjust that all the way up to 10 for right now. And then I'll make one more number slider, and that will be the number of times or number of steps in between the minimum and maximum. I'm going to constrain this to integers, and that way, this is a division, so I don't want to divide by 0, so I'm going to set the minimum to 1 and the maximum to, let's say, 20 or something like that. We can always adjust it later, right? All right, and now let's see what this is spitting out at us in real time as we go along. Okay, so if I look at the ingredients right now, I start at 0 and I end at 10, and there's one step in between. And so I get 0 and 10. Let's up the number of steps. Right. You can see as I adjust that number higher, of course, we get more divisions, and so we get more values. Right. 10 is divisible by 10, and so we start to get integers again. If I divide it up 20 times, then of course we get 21 values, 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5, basically increments of 0.5 all the way up to 10. Okay, so the difference, in series, you set the first number, the last number is going to change as you change your inputs. With range, you set the start and the end, right? And then the number of steps generate more or less numbers in between. But that minimum maximum don't change unless you manually change them. So if I wanted to change this to, between 0 and 5, I could do that. Right. All right. So that's another way of generating a set of numbers. Now, sometimes it's useful to be able to generate, let's say, random numbers. And we'll talk about this much later in this semester. But it's worth maybe showing, right? There's this random number generator. And in fact, there's a number of different ways we could begin to generate numbers. We could generate numbers along the Fibonacci series. There's ways of taking a piece of data and then repeating it in a number of times, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more tools for here to play around with, but I'm just trying to show you some of the things that are really super useful that you'll use a lot starting from now on and throughout the rest of the semester and really basically throughout the rest of your career. So what this number, random number widget creates is, a list of random numbers, of course. But what it needs is a domain. So it's going to generate a certain number of random numbers, but between what minimum, what maximum. So again, we're setting a minimum and maximum here. I'll go ahead and use the same minimum and maximum that we were using for our range. So right now it's set to 0 to 10. Okay. The number of random values, okay, maybe we need more than 1, maybe we need 20 or even more. Now go ahead and plug in. Let's see what we're getting out already. So we're getting 20 random numbers. They're all between 0 and 10, right? And if you're trying to generate more than one list of random numbers, then you can do this with an additional random number widget, but then you change the seed for the random engine, the random number engine that generates a set of pseudo-random numbers. So you can change this, and it'll change the sort of set of random numbers that it gives you, right? But there's several different algorithms it uses to generate random numbers, and that way you don't have any repetitive sets of random numbers, because computers can say they actually generate random numbers, but in the pure scientific sense, random meaning that every number in the sets of possibilities has an equal chance of being selected. We're not really generating random, we're generating a sort of pseudo-random set of numbers. Okay, you don't really have to worry about that so much. Suffice to say, we generated 20, for all practical purposes, random numbers. And if we change any of these, so let's say instead we only want random numbers between 0 and 5, we can do that, of course. And you can see that these update and adjust, right? Once we start to, let's say, change some of these parameters, like maybe we only want 10 numbers, right? Now suddenly we have 10. One of the things you'll notice when you plug in and use this text pad like I am, to sort of see what the results are. If you have a list, we'll have 10 items, but you see how there's these numbers next to them? Those are like a bulleted number list, right? So what these are actually referring to is like if this is a list of items, then each item in the list has an index, right? So the first item in the list has an index of 0, and the second one has an index of 1. Because computers start counting at 0 instead of 1, like we do, it's sort of a little counterintuitive to us. But like, let's say if we have a list of 10 numbers, then that last number is going to have an index of 9, right? And the first one has an index of 0. The second one has an index of 1. So it sometimes can throw people off a little bit. It's a little confusing. It's just the difference in the way a computer stores information versus how our brains think about how numbers are organized. Okay, so that's it. Now we're going to start playing around with more numbers. We're going to generate different sorts of points. I'm going to go over in the next video what I did to generate a grid of points again. Okay, because I think that's really important, and so I just want to be as clear as possible. If you understand it entirely, you could probably just skip that video, okay? But anyway, good luck.